Can you all hear me good? Is there any sound? Is it good?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I'm very happy to be debating David tonight. Me and him already had a good debate back in March, and in just 2 months, our debate has received over 6,000 viewers. So I'm hoping this debate will be as good when we post it online. I'm also very proud today to be debating in my own state where I was born. As a Muslim, it makes me proud, and I definitely feel that it's time for California to come to Islam, because I feel Christianity has failed them. Now as for the topic, is Islam a religion of peace? I say without a doubt, it is. So either way, I'll start with my evidences now, and I'll let him go on with his points when he comes up, and we'll keep going at it. So what's the first evidence that we use to prove that Islam is a religion of peace? We can't just quote verses saying be good to others. It's about whether you force people to become a Muslim. So what does Islam say about forcing people to Islam? It says the opposite. In Surah 2, verse 256, which is Surah Baqarah, it says, "Let there be no compulsion in religion. Truth stands clear from falsehood." So Muslims, from the start, did not have a right to force anybody to Islam, which basically means everyone has the freedom of religion. In fact, the Quran even goes further. In Surah 109, this is what it says. "Say ye, O ye that reject faith, I worship not what you worship, nor will you worship what I worship. And I will not worship that which you have been to worship, nor will you worship what I worship. To you your way, and to me mine." That's the message of Islam. You have your religion, I have mine. There is no compulsion in religion. In fact, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is an example of that. When he entered Medina, he wrote a constitution, a treaty with the Jews. And it said the Jews would have their own religion and the Muslims would have their own religion. And even when the Prophet conquered Mecca with 10,000 Muslims, the pagans were scared. They were saying, he's going to kill us all now because we oppressed him so much. Well, what did the Prophet do? He said, I'm not going to harm any of you. Each of you can have your religion. Don't worry. And this is why most of them converted to Islam, because of his good character. Now I'm sure David would say, well, Surah 109 was revealed in Mecca, and this is before Muhammad had power. And when he came to power, he started forcing people to Islam. Well, I'll ask him for the proof, because there is no such proof. When anyone reads Islamic history, the Prophet Muhammad never forced people to Islam. And again, I go back to the proof. When the Prophet entered Medina, he wrote a treaty with the Jews. And they said, you have your religion, I have mine. So either way, Islam allows freedom of religion, and that's the biggest proof that it is a religion of peace, because you have to grant freedom of religion. Now what about Muslims' treatment toward non-Muslims? Because that's even more important. How should we treat people who aren't Muslims? It doesn't matter, you just allow them freedom of religion, it's how you act towards them. This is what the Quran says in Surah 60, verse 8. Allah forbids you not with regard to those who fight you not for faith, nor drive you out of your homes, from dealing kindly and justly with them. For Allah loves those who are just. So this verse right here says, Muslims should treat non-Muslims who don't oppress us, who don't kick us out of our homes for our religion, in a good and respectable manner. Now if you look at the world, the majority of non-Muslims don't oppress us. The majority of non-Muslims get along with Muslims. So therefore, according to Surah 60 verse 8, we should treat the non-Muslims with kindness and justice. We shouldn't be bad or harsh to them. In fact, this is what Surah 532 says. This is probably one of the most beautiful verses in the Quran, talking about the innocence of humanity. And this verse doesn't only refer to Muslims, but to non-Muslims as well. In Surah 5, verse 32, on that account, we ordained for the children of Israel that if you killed a person, unless it be for murder or spreading mischief in the land, it would be like you killed all of mankind. The Quran is saying if you kill one innocent person, it doesn't say if you kill one innocent Muslim, one innocent person, referring to Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Muslims, anyone. If you kill one of these innocent people, it's like you have killed all of humanity. And the verse goes on, it says, if you save one life, it's like you saved all of humanity.
Now, I'm sure people will say, yeah, well, this teaching was in the Jewish book. Exactly, the Quran is reminding the people of this teaching. God is continuing this beautiful justice verse with the Muslims now. That we shouldn't kill innocent people. That we should be kind with everybody else. It doesn't matter if you're not Muslim or non-Muslim. No one should be oppressed. And this is also what the Prophet said in Sahih Bukhari. This is the tradition, not the Quran. This is like the history of the Prophet's statement. This is what he said. Allah's Apostle mentioned the greatest sin, or he was asked about the greatest sin. He said to join partners in worship with Allah, to kill a soul which has been forbidden to kill. This is what the Prophet said. It's one of the greatest sins to kill a human who isn't allowed to be killed. Someone who's innocent. Now, who's an innocent person? The Prophet answers that in Sahih Bukhari, volume 9. The Prophet said, whoever killed a mu'ahid, which is basically someone who's in a treaty with the Muslims. Basically, like right now, the Muslim world is in treaties with America and the West. We have trade dealerships, tourism, diplomatic relations. So basically, we're in a treaty. And here the Prophet says, whoever kills a mu'ahid, a person who is in treaty with the Muslims, shall not smell the fragrance of paradise. The Prophet here is saying, if you kill a non-Muslim who you have a treaty with, you won't go to paradise. You won't smell the fragrance of paradise. So, either way, this is what the Quran says. To summarize it up, how we should treat non-Muslims. We should be kind and just with non-Muslims. We shouldn't kill or harm any non-Muslim. And we shouldn't kill or harm any non-Muslim who we're in a treaty with. And that's basically the majority of the world. Now, let's move on. What about good manners, behaviors, beautiful, peaceful teachings from the Quran? In Surah 20, verse 112, Allah says, but he who works deeds of righteousness and has faith will have no fear of harm nor any curtailment. So the Quran says, he who does righteous deeds. So what is righteous deeds now? The Quran answers that in Surah 3, 104. Let there arise out of you a band of people inviting to all that is good, enjoining what is wrong and forbidding what is forbidden. They are the ones who attain success. Surah 17, verse 23. The Lord has decreed that you worship none but Him, and you be kind to your parents. Whether one of them gets old, say not to them a word of contempt, nor repel them, but address them with honor. Surah 6, verse 151. Say, come, I will rehearse what Allah has prohibited from you. Join not anything equal with Him. Be good to your parents. Kill not your children. We provide sustenance for you and for them. Come not to shameful deeds, whether open or secret. Take not innocent life, which Allah has made sacred, including the non-Muslims. Except by way of justice and law. Only punish those who go against the law, not just for any reason. This is what Allah commands you, that you may learn wisdom. Surah 7, verse 56. Do not do mischief on the earth after it has been set in order with rules and regulations. For the mercy of Allah is with those who do good. Surah 4, verse 2. To orphans, restore their property, nor substitute worthless things for good one, and do not devour their substance with your own, for that is indeed a great sin. Surah 4, verse 5. To those weak of understanding, make not over your property which Allah has made as a sport for you, but feed and clothe the people, and speak to them words of kindness and justice. Surah 16, verse 125. Invite to the way of your Lord with beautiful words and wisdom and preaching, and argue with them in a way that is best. For Allah knows best who strayed from His path and who received guidance. These are not peaceful, lovely teachings. Now what about from the hadiths? That's only the Quran. In the hadiths, this is what the Prophet taught in Bukhari, volume 8. The Prophet has said, Allah has forbidden you, number 1, to be undutiful to your mothers. Number 2, to withhold what you should give as in charity. To demand what you don't deserve. And to bury your daughters alive. No honor killings. In Sahih Bukhari, volume 8, this is a beautiful story. Allah's Apostle kissed Al-Hasan bin Ali while Al-Aqra bin Abbas At-Tamim was sitting beside him. The Prophet came and he kissed a small child. Al-Aqra said,
I have 10 children, and I've never kissed any of them. Allah's Apostle cast a look at him, and he said, to others will not be treated mercifully. Narrated Aisha from Bukhari, this is the same story. A Bedouin came to the Prophet and said, you kiss the children, we don't kiss them. The Prophet said, I cannot put mercy in your heart after Allah has taken it away. Bukhari, volume 8, another beautiful teaching. The Prophet said, the one who looks after and works for a widow and for a poor person is like a warrior fighting in the cause of God, or is like a person who fasts during the day and prays during the night. In Bukhari, volume 8, the best among you are the best in manners and character. This is what the Prophet taught. And this is another beautiful teaching in Bukhari. Allah's Apostle said, the strong is not the one who overcomes people by his strength, but the strong is the one who controls himself with anger. Control yourself. You don't need yoga. You just follow Allah. Bukhari, volume 8, the Prophet said, make things easy for people and do not make it difficult for them, and make them calm and do not repulse them. Unlike many supposed Muslims who come shouting at everybody. These aren't the examples of Islam. The Prophet said, be kind with people. Another beautiful story and teaching. The Prophet said, beware of suspicion, for suspicion is the worst of false tales. And do not look at other people for their mistakes, and do not spy, and do not be jealous of one another, and do not desert, cut relations with one another. Be friends, respectful to each other, and do not hate one another. Be as brothers. Another beautiful story. This is the mercy that Muslims are supposed to follow by the Prophet's example. The Prophet said, when he prays, he wants to prolong the prayer, but then he hears the child crying. And then what does he do? He cuts the prayer short because he dislikes to put the child's mother in pain. So this is the beautiful mercy that we should follow. Just when a baby is crying, you should shorten the prayer to ease the mother's feelings. Because when a mother hears her child crying, she feels something. Here's another beautiful story. It was narrated in Muslim, Sahih Muslim. This is another tradition book. He will not enter paradise whose neighbor is not secure from his wrongful conduct. So be good and kind to your neighbors. Finally, in another Muslim book, number 1, it is reported on the authority of Abu Hurairah, he who believes in Allah and the last day should utter good words or keep silent. If you don't have anything to do, anything good to say, then keep silent. Only speak good. And he who believes in Allah and the last day should treat his neighbor with kindness. It doesn't say if he's a Muslim neighbor, your neighbor, general. So here you can see, these are beautiful, peaceful teachings from the Quran and the Hadith. Now what about the concept of forgiveness in Islam? Christians are so fond of saying, Christianity has turned the cheek when someone hits you. Well, what does the Quran say? The Quran says something better. In Surah 42, verses 39 to 43, this is what it says. And those who, when an oppressive wrong is done on them, help and defend themselves, the recompense for an injury is injury equal. So if you get oppressed, you have the right to carry out justice. But if a person forgives and makes reconciliation, his reward is due with Allah. So Allah says, it is better to forgive and reconcile with one another. When someone comes and makes problem with you, don't always be hasty to go fight. Turn the cheek. And this is what it continues and says. But indeed, if any of you show patience and forgive, that would truly be an exercise of courageous will and resolution in the conduct of affairs. The Quran says this is the best thing to do. Surah 2, 109. Many people of the scripture want to make it disbelievers. Many missionaries come preaching to us. How should a Muslim act? Should we go kill them? No. This is what the Quran says. Forgive them and be kind to them until Allah gives command. The Quran doesn't say go shout at missionaries, beat them, kill them. It says forgive them and look away. Now, as everyone knows, the Prophet Muhammad is an example to us Muslims. So let's see how he was when he showed mercy. This is from Bukhari, narrated by Anas. A Jew lady brought a poisoned sheep for the Prophet, who ate from it. She was brought to the Prophet, and he asked, shall we kill her?
He said, should we kill this lady? He said, no. I continued to see the effect of poison. So they brought this lady to him. They knew she poisoned him. She confessed it. They said, should we kill her? He said, no. Let her go. And you can find this in Tabari. He likes quoting Tabari. You can find this in Ibn Ishaq. He likes quoting Ibn Ishaq. Now what about another incident? You can find this on Ibn Ishaq's book, page 376. Go by the book, you can read this. There was a man named Hamza. He's the Prophet's uncle. The Prophet used to love this man. He's his uncle. He was very close with him. During a battle, there was a man, a black man from Abyssinia. He killed the Prophet's uncle. He threw an arrow right into his heart. He took the man's heart out and he gave it to this lady. Now the Prophet eventually found this killer. And the killer was in his presence. The Prophet even asked him, how did you kill my uncle? And he explained it, and the Prophet said, go away from me. Here the Prophet could have killed this man who killed his uncle. What did he say? He said, get away from me. This is true mercy. When you're in a position of power to kill somebody and you don't. Not when you're not in a position of power and you show mercy. That's not mercy. So when you're in a position of power and you forgive somebody, that is true mercy. Now, what about jihad? What about jihad? People love bringing up jihad. First of all, I need to make this point clear. When we say Islam is a religion of peace, we don't say Islam is a pacifist religion. And people always confuse the two together. When they bring up a verse of jihad, they say so much for the religion of peace. Islam doesn't prohibit you from defending yourself. In fact, no democratic country forbids you the right to defend yourself. So what about jihad, a word that has been abused so badly? Holy war, all of this nonsense you find on blogs by Robert Spencer and all of these people. So what does jihad mean? It simply means to struggle or to strive. Someone who quits smoking to his addiction, that's a jihad. What I'm doing right now is a jihad. My friend with me, he's doing a jihad just by keeping me in his house and looking after me. So jihad simply means a struggle. Sometimes you can do physical jihad, struggle to fight someone who's oppressing you. And there are conditions for jihad. Since Islam is the perfected religion, it has rules and regulations for everything. And the rules and regulations for jihad, warfare, are very clear. It says in Surah 2, verse 190, fight in the cause of Allah against those who fight you. Not go fight just for that. Fight in the cause of Allah against those who fight you. If someone comes fighting you, you have the right to defend yourself. And it says in Surah 42, verses 39 to 40, and those who, when an oppressive wrong is inflicted on them, help and defend themselves, the recompense for an injury is an equal. So the Quran says, you have the right to fight back if someone's coming and oppressing you. Surah 22, verse 39 to 40. Permission to fight is given to those upon whom war is made, because they are oppressed. And most surely Allah is well able to assist them. They are those who have been expelled from their homes in defiance of right, except that they say our Lord is Allah. So they just kick them out of their homes, the pagans, just because they said we believe in one God, and they believed in 360 idols. Did not Allah check one set of people by means of another? There would surely have been pulled down monasteries, churches, synagogues and mosques in which the name of Allah is commemorated in abundant measure. So Allah is saying if you don't fight back, even the churches, synagogues will all be taken down. Now, what about, how is Muslims supposed to fight? Because we know we're allowed to fight, but how are we supposed to fight? That's more important. And again, Surah 2, 190 teaches Muslims how we should conduct ourselves in warfare. Fight in the cause of Allah those who fight you, but do not transgress the limits, for Allah does not love the transgressors. So what does it mean, do not transgress the limits? Well, the Prophet answered that in Bukhari, narrated by Abdullah. During some of the raids, ghazawat, of the Prophet, a woman was found killed. Allah's apostle disapproved of the killing of women and children. Bukhari, volume 4, narrated by Ibn Umar, the same thing. Allah's apostle forbade the killing of women and children. In Malik Muwatta, this is another hadith literature, this is what Abu Bakr did. Abu Bakr is the right-hand man of the Prophet. He advised a man named Yazid on 10 things to do in warfare. I advise you 10 things. Do not kill women or children, or an aged or infirm person, handicapped person. Do not cut down fruit-bearing trees. Do not destroy an inhabited place. Do not slaughter sheep or camels except for food. Do not burn bees and do not scatter them. The Quran is even saying, don't mistreat the bees. Do not steal from the booty and do not be cowardly. The hadith is even telling you, don't even mistreat animals, a bee, an insect. And Muslim, book 19. This is what the Prophet used to command the Muslims before he would send them on an expedition or a raid. He said, do not mutilate the dead bodies. Don't go chopping their heads off and burning their limbs and dragging them from a car. Do not mutilate them and do not kill the children. So this is how Muslims are supposed to fight, with honor. Don't kill women and children. Don't destroy fruits and trees. Don't even harm the animals. Don't kill the aged or the old people or the handicapped, etc., etc. Now, as we all know, during warfare, people are captured in war. So how should Muslims treat their captives of war? Well, this is how we should treat them. This is beautiful teaching. And remember, this is 1400 years ago, the supposed backward people. And this is what the Prophet taught. He should make his captive sit alongside him and make him eat with him. And if the food seems to run short, then spare some of your food for the captive. So the Quran, the Hadith says, if you have a captive, sit with him on the same table. Give him some of the food if there's none remaining. And another narration, your slaves, your captives are your brothers. This is 1400 years ago, before any Geneva Convention, in saying your slaves, your captives are your brothers. You should feed them what you eat, and you should dress them of what you wear. This is what the Quran says. Feed the captive what you're eating, and give him what you're wearing. And he's your brother. Now what about if you hit a slave? If you hit a captive? This is what the Prophet said. This is what one of his companions said, and this is what the Prophet said in response. When I was beating my servant, I heard a voice behind me. And this was the Prophet. Abu Mas'ud, bear in mind that Allah has more dominance over you than you have upon your captive. I turned to him and I set him free for the sake of Allah. And this is what he said. The Prophet said, thereupon he said, if you hadn't freed him after beating him, the gates of hell would have been open for you and burn you. So if you beat a captive, you will go to hell, according to the Prophet. That's a beautiful, peaceful teaching. Which captives of war wouldn't want something like that? When you look at Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo and all of that. Now what about peace? Because we fight. But what are the conditions for peace? The Quran even answers that. And remember, this is all about jihad. In Surah 2, verse 192 to 193. But if they cease, if they stop fighting, Allah is oft forgiving, most merciful, and fight them until there is no more tumult or oppression. But if they cease, let there be no hostility except to those who practice oppression. So if they come and make peace, it's over. Surah 8, 61. But if the enemy inclines to peace, if the enemy comes for peace, you also incline towards peace and trust in Allah, for He is the one who hears and He knows all things. So this is jihad. Fight only when you're oppressed. Only don't kill women and children. Don't destroy homes. Don't destroy or kill animals. Don't kill the aged people. Make peace if they come make peace with you. If you have captives of war, treat them like your brother. Now what about love? Love. Christians they always say Christianity is love. And Islam has nothing about love. Well, this is what the Prophet said in Sahih Muslim, book 1, number 96. Abu Hurairah reported, the Messenger of Allah reported, you shall not enter paradise so as long as you do not affirm belief, and you will not believe as long as you do not love one another. The Prophet taught us, you won't go to paradise, you won't have true belief until you love one another. In fact, one of Allah's names is Al-Wudud, which means the all-loving. What about the concept of love in the Quran? In Surah 2, verse 195,
and spend of your substance in the cause of Allah, and do not make your hands contribute to your own destruction, but do good, for Allah loves those who do good. Surah 3:31. Say, if you love Allah, follow me, Allah will love you and forgive you of your sins, for Allah is the most forgiving, most merciful. Surah 3, verse 76. Nay, those that keep their plighted faith and act aright, verily Allah loves those who act with righteousness. Surah 3, verse 134. Those who spend freely on charity, whether in prosperity or in adversity, who restrain anger and pardon all men, for Allah loves those who do good. So here you see, the Quran and the Hadith teach Muslims to love. So what have we seen so far? Muslims aren't allowed to force anybody into Islam. No compulsion in religion. You have your faith, I have mine. Muslims aren't supposed to treat or harm you. We're all in a treaty. We have to treat you with respect. If we kill one innocent life, it's like we killed all of humanity. And if we save one of you, it's like we saved all of you. Number 3, Muslims are allowed to make war, but only in self-defense. And even when we make war, we're supposed to conduct ourselves in a proper manner. I just showed you Allah is loving. I showed you the good behaviors and good teachings from the Quran and the Hadith. Be kind to your fellow man, give charity, be peaceful with one another, love one another. So all of this, without a doubt in my mind, proves Islam is a religion of peace. Now I want to do one thing before I'm done, and if I can ask, how much time do I have left? Do you know? 3 minutes. 3 minutes? 3 minutes. Okay, before I go now, you have to keep something in mind. Now I'm sure David will come quote several verses of jihad, but always remember one thing. Every time he quotes a verse, and I don't know what he's going to quote, but always remember something called context. When he quotes a verse, remember the before, the after, not only the before and the after, but the historical period as well. See, I'm lucky, since I'm a student of literature, I already do this for my assignments. We're told to examine text. We're told to examine the text, the context, and the historical context. So keep that in mind. Whenever he comes and quotes a hadith or a Quranic verse, remember the before and after, its context, and the historical context. Also remember, in case he quotes from Ibn Ishaq or hadith, or not hadith, Ibn Ishaq, Tabari. Remember, Ibn Ishaq, Tabari are only historical accounts. They put anything into the book. They didn't verify everything they put. So always remember, when he quotes something, be sure, maybe this story isn't even authentic by Muslim standards, when he quotes Ibn Ishaq and Tabari. Maybe he won't, I'm just saying that. So always keep this in mind. Don't jump to fast conclusions. Remember what I told you. Remember, if he comes to talk about jihad, remember I told you how Muslims are supposed to conduct themselves with jihad. Don't just throw everything I said out of your ear, because you have to put it all together in context. So whenever he quotes about jihad or something else, remember the context in which I just gave you and what it is about jihad. So don't jump to fast conclusions. And that's it for now. Thank you. And I'm excited to hear David. Thanks.
Check. All right. Assalamu alaikum. I'd like to thank Ministry to Muslims for putting these debates together, and also Sami for agreeing to participate. Islam and Christianity are both growing, and so the world needs to know what these two religions teach. I want to point out here at the beginning that my objection to Islam, my real objection to Islam, is not that it's violent. My objection to Islam is that it's not true. If Islam were true, I would have to accept the violence, whether I liked it or not, because it would be commanded by God. And just to explain what I mean, I'm looking back there and I see Pastor George Saye. George, I promise in front of all of these people, if I ever convert to Islam, if Sami ever convinces me to become a Muslim, I am going to kill you. I promise you. Not because I want to. I don't want to hurt anyone. But as far as I can tell, Islam commands that people like George should die. And after I kill George, I'm going after San Shamoon. After I go after San Shamoon, I'm going after Jay Smith, Robert Spencer, Daniel Scott. These people are all dead. I promise you. Again, not because I want to, but because as far as I can tell, that's what Islam teaches. Now maybe Sammy's going to convince me otherwise tonight, but we'll see. In this debate I'm going to show that Islam calls for violence against non-Muslims, against people who leave the religion, against people who criticize Islam, against women, and against sinners, even sinners who repent. I'm going to show that Muhammad, even though he could have lived a life of peace, chose the path of violence, bloodshed, robbery, and terror. I'm going to show that Muhammad's closest followers, those who knew him best, carried on this tradition after he died, and that this tradition continues to our day. The conclusion will be undeniable. Islam is not a religion of peace. Now, Sami said that Islam teaches many good things. I don't dispute this. I agree completely. There are many teachings in Islam, in the Quran, and in the Hadith that I would agree with completely. Islam was influenced a lot by Christianity and by Judaism. And so there are lots of things that Sami said that I would say amen to. But there are some other things that we're going to have to look at more closely. Now, how do we know that Islam is not a religion of peace? Well, when we read the Muslim sources, we find that the Islamic solution for practically everything is violence. If people reject Islam or refuse to pay the jizya, the solution is to fight and kill them. Violence. If people leave Islam, the solution is to kill them. Violence. If people criticize Islam, the solution is to murder them. Violence. If women disobey their husbands, the solution is to tie them up and beat them. Violence. When sinners are caught, the solution is to beat them or to cut parts of their body off or to kill them. Violence, violence, violence. Let's look at the evidence. Sami pointed to Surah 2, 256. There is no compulsion in religion, as if this and the few other verses, peaceful verses in the Quran, show that Islam is a religion of peace. What Sami didn't bring up is that, according to many of his best scholars, the peaceful verses of the Quran had been abrogated, cancelled, by verses on fighting, which came later. Ibn Kathir is a bit inconsistent on this, but he's considered by many Muslims to be the greatest Quranic commentator of all time. And he says that Surah 2, 256 was abrogated by verses like 973, 9123, and 4816, which call for fighting. Ibn Kathir says, "Therefore all people of the world should be called to Islam. If any one of them refuses to do so, or refuses to pay the jizya, they should be fought till they are killed." If you don't submit to Islam and you refuse to pay the jizya, you should be fought till you are killed. This is not Osama bin Laden I'm quoting, my friends. This is Ibn Kathir. In Sahih Muslim, number 30, Muhammad says, "I have been commanded to fight against people so long as they do not declare that there is no God but Allah." He's been commanded to fight who? People who don't declare that there's no God but Allah. Guess what? That's almost everyone in this room. That's most of the people in this world. People who don't confess that Allah is the only God. Sahih al-Bukhari, number 6924, Muhammad says, "I have been ordered to fight the people till they say, none has the right to be worshipped but Allah. And whoever says this, Allah will save his property and life from me." So until you recite the Shahada, your life and property are in jeopardy. This is not according to me. This is not according to some critic of Islam. This is according to Muhammad in Sahih al-Bukhari, Islam's most reliable collection of ahadith. It's clear then that Muslims are called to fight people until they accept Islam. The only exception is the case of certain groups such as Christians and Jews who have the option of paying the jizya tax, which is an acknowledgement of inferiority and a sign of humiliation. We find this criterion in Surah 929. It says this, "Fight those who believe not in Allah nor the last day, nor hold that which is forbidden, which hath been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth, Islam, from among the people of the book, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. Fight people of the book, Jews and Christians. Why? Because of what they believe. They do not believe, they do not hold that forbidden which Allah hath forbidden. And they do not acknowledge Islam. Now, Sami asked for context. I'll give you what Ibn Kathir says about this. Ibn Kathir explains this verse. This honorable ayah was revealed with the order to fight the people of the book. After the pagans were defeated, the people entered Allah's religion in large numbers, and the Arabian Peninsula was secured under the Muslims' control. Allah commanded His messenger to fight the people of the Scriptures, still quoting Ibn Kathir, to fight the people of the Scriptures, Jews and Christians, on the 9th year of the Hijrah, and He prepared His army to fight the Romans and called people to jihad, announcing His intent and destination. Now, why were Muslims called to fight Christians? Sami says you have to go to the context. Amen to that. That's exactly what Ibn Kathir does. According to Ibn Kathir, the reason that Muslims are called to fight the Jews and Christians is found in the very next verse. Context. The next verse says this, and the Jews say, Uzair is the son of Allah. And the Christians say, the Messiah is the son of Allah. These are the words of their mouths. They imitate the saying of those who disbelieved before. May Allah destroy them. Destroy who? Destroy Christians and Jews. And how does Allah do this? By the hands of Muslims. Ibn Kathir says, fighting the Jews and Christians is legislated because they're idolaters and disbelievers. Not because we're oppressing them, because we're idolaters. Allah encourages, still quoting Ibn Kathir, Allah encourages the believers to fight the disbelieving Jews and Christians who uttered this terrible statement and uttered lies against Allah the Exalted. Now, Ibn Kathir knew more about the Muslim sources than just about anyone else in history. He says that Muslims were called to fight Christians because we say Jesus is the Son of God. Unless we convert to Islam or come crawling on our hands and knees to pay off the Muslim leaders, Muslims are commanded to fight us. The only time Muslims aren't supposed to fight non-Muslims is when Muslims are too weak to win. According to Surah 328, if Muslims feel threatened by a stronger adversary, they're even allowed to pretend to be friendly. As Ibn Kathir says, in this case, such believers are allowed to show friendship outwardly, but never inwardly. Abu Darda put it this way, we smile in the face of some people, although our hearts curse them. They smile in our faces and curse us in their hearts while they're in a situation where they're weaker than their adversaries. So Muslims are allowed to seek peace temporarily when they're weak. Apart from that, Muslims are told not to be peaceful. Surah 47:35 says, be not weary and faint-hearted, crying for peace, when you should be uppermost. According to Ibn Kathir, this verse means that Muslims shouldn't compromise, seek peace, or end the fighting with non-Muslims when Muslims are in a position of power. What did Sami say? He said that true forgiveness is when you're in a position of power. What does this say? If Muslims are in a position of power, they are not to seek peace. Well, when are Muslims allowed to seek peace? Ibn Kathir tells us, if the disbelievers are considered more powerful and numerous than the Muslims, then the Imam may decide to hold a treaty if he judges that it entails a benefit for the Muslims. Are you noticing a pattern here? If Muslims are strong, they're told to fight everyone. They're told not to seek peace. If they're weak, they're told to pretend to be friendly and to seek a temporary peace while they build up enough strength to attack. Is that a religion of peace? No. This is a religion that's commanded to pretend to be peaceful when Muslims are too weak to win a battle. Make no mistake, in Islam, fighting is not an afterthought. Fighting is an essential part of the religion. Sahih al-Bukhari, 2785. A man came to Allah's messenger and said, guide me to such a deed as equals jihad in reward. Muhammad replied, I do not find such a deed. Sahih al-Bukhari, 2796, the Prophet said, a single endeavor of fighting in Allah's cause in the afternoon or in the forenoon is better than all the world and whatever is in it. Sahih al-Bukhari, 2795, the Prophet said, nobody who dies in finds good from Allah in the hereafter would wish to come back to this world, even if he were given the whole world and whatever is in it, except the martyr who, on seeing the superiority of martyrdom, would like to come back to the world and get killed again in Allah's cause. According to Islam, what's the greatest thing in the world? Fighting and dying for Allah in a jihad. In fact, this is what Muhammad wanted most. Sahih al-Bukhari, 2797, the Prophet said, "By him in whose hand my soul is, I would love to be martyred in Allah's cause, and then come back to life, and then get martyred, and then come back to life again, and then get martyred, and then come back to life again and get martyred." Is this the sort of thing a man of peace would say? I just want to fight until I get killed, and then come back and fight some more until I get killed, and come back and fight some more until I get killed. Blood, violence, the sword, that's all I want. It's the meaning of life. It's greater than everything else. Now, how can Muslims even suggest that the man who said these things was a peaceful man? I don't know, but they do. I'd say that if we look at the evidence honestly, we see that Muslims are called to fight everyone. And Sami says there was no compulsion. Muhammad didn't do this. Well, let me give you Abu Bakr's words, because Sami referred to Abu Bakr as Muhammad's right-hand man. After Muhammad died, many Muslims started rebelling, and Abu Bakr sent them some letters. And in one of those letters, he describes what Muhammad did in Arabia. He says, "Verily God, may he be exalted, sent Muhammad with his truth to his creation, as a bearer of good tidings, and as a warner, and as one calling others to God, with his permission, and as a light-bringing lamp, so that he might warn all who live, and so that the saying against the unbelievers might be fulfilled. So God guided with truth whoever responded to him, and the apostle of God, Muhammad, with God's permission, struck whoever turned his back to him until he came to Islam willingly or grudgingly." According to Abu Bakr, Muhammad's right-hand man, Muhammad brought people to Islam willingly or grudgingly, whether they wanted to come or not. And so if we want to say there's no compulsion in religion, who we're going to listen to? We're going to listen to our friend Sami's interpretation or Abu Bakr. Now, the second thing I want to look about as far as violence is concerned is the killing of apostates. Violence is the solution not just with regard to fighting. It's the solution for apostasy. Sahih al-Bukhari, 6921, says that female apostates should be killed. 6922 says that anyone who leaves Islam must be killed. 6923 says that Muhammad ordered apostates to be killed. 6930 says that Muslims who kill apostates will have a reward on the day of resurrection. Now, why not talk to them? Why not go over the evidence for Islam with them? The evidence is so clear. You should be able to teach them that way. No, the solution is violence. Violence is also the solution for criticism of Islam. In the Muslim sources, we read about a man named Abu Afak, who was more than 100 years old. He wrote a poem that got him killed. I'll read the poem to you. "Long have I lived, but never have I seen an assembly, a collection of people more faithful to the undertaking and their allies when called upon than the sons of Kayla when they assembled. Men who overthrew mountains and never submitted. A rider who came to them, Muhammad, split them in two, saying, permitted, forbidden, of all sorts of things. Had you believed in glory or kingship, you would have followed Tuba." When he sent out that poem, Muhammad said, "Who's going to kill him for me?" He was killed while sleeping by a Muslim. A woman named Asma heard that the Muslims had killed this man for writing a poem, so she wrote a poem too. Muhammad ordered his followers to kill her as well. In Sunan Abu Dawud, 43-48, we read about a blind man who had a sex slave. She used to say mean things about Muhammad. He got sick of it. Here's what happened. The Muslim forbade her, but she did not stop. He rebuked her, but she did not give up her habit. One night she began to slander the Prophet and abuse him. So he took a dagger, placed it on her belly, pressed it, and killed her. A child who came between her legs was smeared with the blood that was there. And so Muhammad finds out about the murder and says, "Hey, who murdered this? Who murdered this woman? What's going on?" The man came in and said, "She keeps talking about you." Muhammad said, "No punishment. No punishment." Now, what did the woman do? She criticized Muhammad, and she was killed for it. Let's look at another. According to Sunan Abu Dawud 43:49, quote, "A Jewess used to abuse the Prophet and disparage him. A man strangled her till she died. The Apostle of Allah declared that no recompense was payable for her blood." No recompense. This woman was strangled to death by a Muslim for criticizing Muhammad, and according to Muhammad, the Muslim did nothing wrong. So how does Islam deal with criticism? Well, if Muslims are weak, as they were at the beginning of Muhammad's career, they do nothing. But when Muslims are strong enough, critics are brutally murdered. The solution to criticism is violence. Now, sometimes women don't do everything that men want them to do. So how are Muslims supposed to deal with their unruly wives? According to Surah 434, if your wives get out of line, you are commanded, as Pickfeld translates it, to banish them to beds apart and scourge them. Now, Sami says, you have to go to the context. All right, the context of this verse is interesting. I mean, the historical context. A Muslim woman came to Muhammad because her husband had slapped her in the face extremely hard and left a mark. Muhammad said that he wanted to go and rebuke the man. But then Surah 434 came down, and Muhammad said, I wanted one thing, namely to rebuke the person who hit his wife, but Allah wanted another, namely, if they're out of line, beat them. There's quite a lot of hitting and slapping women in the Muslim sources. Muhammad physically assaulted his wife Aisha in Sahih Muslim 21:27. Muhammad hit her in her chest, and Aisha said that it hurt her. One day Aisha held up the Muslim army looking for a bracelet. She says in Sahih al-Bukhari 68:45, Abu Bakr, Muhammad's right-hand man, came towards me and struck me violently with his fist. Abu Bakr, the first rightly guided caliph, also hits his daughter Aisha in Sahih Muslim 35:06. In the same passage, Umar, the second rightly guided caliph, talks about slapping his wife whenever she asks for too much money. Now, Muhammad did say things about treating wives kindly. In fact, in Sunan Abu Dawud 21:41, Muhammad temporarily ended the practice of wife beating. But listen to what happened. Muhammad said, do not beat Allah's handmaidens. But when Umar came to the Apostle of Allah and said, women have become emboldened towards their husbands, the Prophet gave permission to beat them, because they were being too bold with their husbands. Not beating the wives just didn't work. Muhammad also declared that wife beating is a private matter. In Sunan Abu Dawud 21:42, Muhammad said, a man will not be asked as to why he beat his wife. It's no one's business. We see Umar appealing to Muhammad's rule when someone tried to stop him from beating his wife. Sunan Ibn Majah, 1986, says this, one night Umar arranged a feast. When it was midnight, he got up and went towards his wife to beat her. I separated them both. When he went to bed, he said to me, O Ashaf, preserve for me a thing that I heard from Allah's messenger. A man will not be taken to task for beating his wife. How dare this Muslim stop one of the rightly guided caliphs from beating his wife? In Sahih al-Bukhari 58:25, a woman came to Aisha. Her husband had beaten her so bad that her skin turned green. Aisha said to Muhammad, I have not seen any woman suffering as much as the believing women, as much as the Muslims. Look, her skin is greener than her clothes. Muhammad did a little investigation and decided that the woman got what she deserved because she had been unjustly complaining about her husband. But notice what Aisha said. I have not seen any woman suffering as much as the believing women. According to Aisha herself, the mother of the faithful, the Muslim women were being beaten more severely than the pagan women. Why was that? Well, because in Islam, it's commanded by God. Beating your wives is the solution for disobedience. Violence is also the solution for sin in Islam. If you steal, you get your hand chopped off. If you have sex with someone and you're not married, you get 100 lashes. If you have sex with someone and you are married, you get stoned to death. Homosexuals also get stoned to death. Sami said that California needs Islam. I don't think there are enough stones in California to have Islam come here. And he also said that Christianity failed. Well, the purpose of Christianity is not to control the world. We are not out to control people. So, if that's the case in Islam, then do what you want to do. So we see again and again in the Muslim sources that people would come to Muhammad and confess their sins. They had repented. These are people who had committed adultery. They would come and ask Muhammad to purify them. And Muhammad would order his followers to stone them to death. But these are people who are repenting. Why not give them a second chance? Well, there's no second chance. There's no reform. The penalty is death. Now, all of this raises an obvious question. If the Muslim solution for everything is bloodshed, well, what sense does it make to say that Islam is peaceful? What in the world do you mean by peace? So we can see that Islam teaches Muslims to be violent in many situations. But we can also look at the early Muslim history and see that Muhammad chose the path of violence when he could have taken the path of peace. Let's go back to the beginning. Muhammad became convinced that he was a prophet around 610 AD. For a while, he didn't preach openly, but eventually he did. He started telling the pagan tribes that their religion was false and that they were going to burn in hell if they didn't turn to Allah. And eventually the pagans began persecuting the Muslims. Now, Muslims looked at this period and complained about the intolerant pagans. How dare they persecute Muhammad? How intolerant. But let's be consistent for a moment. Don't ever forget that Muhammad preached in Mecca for 10 years openly, and he made it out with his life. Would I last 10 years today in Mecca preaching against the religious beliefs of the people who were there? Not a chance. Would I last 10 months? Would I last 10 days? 10 minutes? I don't think I would last 10 minutes if I started openly criticizing the religious beliefs of the people who were there. Islam is much more violent and intolerant than even the pagans were when it comes to criticizing the religion. And they even tried peaceful methods. They begged Muhammad to stop. They offered him money to stop. He was allowed to continue being a Muslim. Just please stop coming down here in front of our sanctuary and criticizing our beliefs. But they did persecute the Muslims, and eventually it got so bad that Muhammad wanted to leave. Muhammad moved 280 miles north to Medina. And here's the key. Muhammad was safe in Medina. The Meccans tried to kill him when he left Mecca, mostly because he promised he would bring them slaughter. But once he was gone, they were relieved. So Muhammad was in Medina. The people of Medina agreed that they would protect him. So Muhammad was safe. The Muslims could live in peace. No one was going to kill them. They could worship Allah, study the Quran in peace. But Muhammad didn't want to live in peace. He started robbing the Meccan caravans. Muhammad knew that the people of Mecca depended on these caravans. Anyone in the town who had money would invest it, hoping to get back something extra to feed their families for the year. If the caravan didn't return, some people were going to starve. So Muhammad started attacking these caravans. 7 months after his arrival in Medina, Muhammad sent 30 Muslims to attack one of them. But a non-Muslim interceded and ended the hostilities. The Meccans did nothing to get even. About a month later, Muhammad sent twice as many men to attack another caravan. Some arrows were fired, but the Muslims got scared and left. The Meccans again did nothing to get even. Muhammad then sent another raiding party, but they missed the caravan. After that, Muhammad himself began leading the raiding parties. On the next attack, the Muslims once again missed the caravan. A month later, Muhammad went out to attack the caravan at the head of 200 Muslims and a number of non-Muslims. A few months later, Muhammad marched out again, and the raid once again failed. But these missions weren't a complete failure. Muhammad was forming alliances with different groups. He wanted strong allies to help him attack. A little later, Muhammad's followers had their first successful raid, the Naqla raid. One of the Muslims shaved his head so that the people guarding the caravan would think that this man was on a religious journey. Then the Muslims attacked, killed the man, and took the goods and some captives. The problem was that they did this during the holy month, when all parties had agreed there would be no fighting. Muhammad was a bit worried about this at first, but then he received Surah 2:17, which says that fighting during the holy month was bad, but since the pagans had persecuted the Muslims, it was okay to attack them during the holy month when there was a truce. So the spoils were divided up, and Abdullah, who had attacked the caravan during the holy month, violating a peace agreement, was now called the commander of the faithful. Muslims went on 7 raiding expeditions, and the Meccans never retaliated. But now the Muslims had gone too far. They had killed during the holy month. It was clear that the Muslims weren't going to stop attacking the caravans, and the Meccan trade would never be safe. So the pagan tribes sent an army to protect the next caravan. The Muslims attacked, and then you had the Battle of Badr. Now, who was attacking here? Who were the aggressors? The Muslims. They attacked the caravans over and over and over. And it was only when the Muslims violated the rules of the people of Mecca that they finally reacted. This was terrorism. This was the livelihood of the people of Mecca. Muhammad knew this, and that's why he kept attacking the caravans. He had a chance to live in peace, but he chose the path of fighting. Many people, Muslims and non-Muslims, died because of that decision. Now, the next decade is pretty straightforward. Muhammad eliminates the Jews, he conquers Mecca, and he receives revelations telling him to fight everyone. But I'd like to look at something that took place a little after Muhammad died. The third caliph, Uthman, was murdered. The fourth caliph, Ali, didn't do much to punish the murderers. Aisha, one of Muhammad's many wives, decided to do something about it. So she raised an army of Muslims and fought a bloody battle against Ali and his Muslim supporters. Ali won, but the battlefield was covered with 10,000 dead Muslims. Their blood was shed by other Muslims. So Aisha, the mother of the faithful, led a battle against Ali, the commander of the faithful. Muslim versus Muslim. Now my question is this: why did Aisha turn to violence as the solution for her disagreement with Ali? Why was bloodshed the only solution? Where did these good Muslims, some of them, the best Muslims, learn that disagreement should be settled through bloodshed? They learned this from Muhammad. And keep in mind the fact that this was the best generations of Muslims. Muhammad said that the best generation of Muslims was the first generation. What did they do? They killed each other in bloody combat over a disagreement. This is the example that Muslims are supposed to follow. As for violence, there's plenty more we can talk about, and I'm sure there are other issues that will come up in these debates. But we've seen enough to know that Islam is not a religion of peace. We've seen that Islam promotes violence towards unbelievers, violence towards apostates, violence towards people who criticize Islam, violence towards women, and violence towards sinners, even sinners who beg for forgiveness. We've also seen that even when Muhammad had a chance to live in peace, he chose the path of violence and bloodshed instead. Why? Because according to him, the greatest thing in the world is to fight and die. We see that because of this, Muhammad's followers took this example to heart. They slaughtered each other in bloody combat over a disagreement. And according to Muhammad, this was the best generation of Muslims. So is Islam a religion of peace? Well, if you say it is, I have no clue what you mean by peace. Because I see fighting, bloodshed, and terrorism. And as long as Islam teaches that fighting is the greatest thing in the world, it's the greatest thing that anyone can do, I don't see how it can be a religion of peace.
30 seconds, Steve.
Done.
30 seconds.
No, I'm done.
We have 31 seconds. Okay. Sami Zaatari.
Can you all hear me? Yeah, okay. I thank David for that. I still say Islam is a religion of peace. He didn't refute my points, which I brought up. But anyway, he's repeating same points, which I refuted in our last debate. He brought up the issue of Abu Affan, the old guy who was killed in his sleep. Asma. I already refuted that in my last debate. These two people didn't just write poetry. If you actually quote the real stories, these people instigated the violence, and they were instigating against the Prophet, which was against the treaty. So let's put it in context. What about the singer who was killed, or the Jews? These people weren't just singing. These people are inciting violence, not just happily singing like today in the newspaper, etc., etc. And then he brings up the point, Muhammad made it out alive. But what he doesn't tell you, the only reason why he made it out alive is because he was with a powerful family who protected him. The pagans always used to go to his uncle and said, let us kill him, let us get rid of him. And his family's like, how can I get rid of my own nephew? So that's why he didn't die. And what he fails to mention, when he moved to Medina, the pagans actually did want to kill the Prophet. They brought men from each clan. So each clan would have blood on their hands,
and the Prophet's family couldn't fight back. But what happened? God protected the messenger. So I don't know why he leaves that out. They did try to kill him, but he got away. And the reason why they didn't kill him in those 10 years is because his family protected him. Not because they were nice, peaceful, lovely people. And then he brings up the point about raiding caravans. This is terrorism. What he doesn't tell you is that those pagans stole the homes of the Muslims who were forced to go, and then they sold the Muslim property. Because Muslims were forced out of Mecca, the pagans illegally took their homes and their property. Eye for an eye. They hurted the Muslims' property, we will hurt their property. They didn't just raid the caravans out of nowhere. As I said in my last debate, economical warfare, it's practiced everywhere. So those points are mute. What about apostates? This is a point which I said you have to deal with the context. First of all, the answer lies in the Quran. The Quran doesn't say kill them. It says just ignore them and let Allah deal with them in the hereafter. So what about the hadith which says kill them? First of all, the hadith is very vague. Again, you have to look at historical context. Back then, apostates of Islam were actually spies, enemies. They used to pretend they were Muslims just to create problems from within and to destroy the Muslim community from within. And then they would leave Islam, go to Mecca or the enemies of Islam and say, you see, we're apostates. Islam isn't good. They're just pretending. So the Prophet had to get rid of these enemy combatants. These weren't just normal apostates. For instance, in today's world, if we have an apostate, you shouldn't kill him. Why? Because times have changed. Today, most apostates, they just go live with their life. Unlike back then, most apostates were actually spies trying to infiltrate the Muslims and cause problems from within. And they used to make lies about Muslims. They're even called the hypocrites. That's why they were told to be killed. Not just kill them for no reason. Again, historical context. If anyone studies it, they'll see it for themselves. Now what about women? He brings up the part to beat your wives. Why doesn't he quote Surah 4:19, which is right a few passages behind it? O you who believe, you are forbidden to inherit women against your will. You shouldn't treat them with harshness, that you may take away part of the dower which you gave to them. On the contrary, live with them on a footing of kindness and equity. So what about beating them? Why doesn't he quote the Prophet's opinion? Why not go to Prophet Muhammad himself? Why not go to Ibn Abbas, who's one of the greatest Islamic commentators? Why go all the way to Ibn Kathir? Let's go to Ibn Abbas. This is how the Prophet said, this is what he said about Surah 434, and then I'll show you what Ibn Abbas said. My last recommendation, this is before the Prophet died, my last recommendation to you is that you treat your woman well. Truly, they are your helpmates, and you have no right over them beyond that, except if they commit a manifest indecency. If they do, then refuse to share your bed with them, and hit them without indecent violence, meaning don't beat them leaving marks. فَضْرِبُونَ ضَرْبًا غَيْرَ مُبَارَكٍ. Don't cause pain to them. What did Ibn Abbas say? I said to Ibn Abbas, what is the kind of hitting that is not harsh? He said, hitting with a siwak and the like. My friend has a siwak stick, he can come show to all of you after the debate if you want to see it. That's what we're meant to hit them with. It's a light tap. Secondly, the word that is used is daraba. A better word for the word daraba is not beat, it's hit. And as my Dutch Muslim brother wrote, this is I'm quoting him, the Arabic word used in noble verse 434 above is idribuna, which is derived from daraba. The word in Arabic means to strike or hit. It includes everything from a tap to a toothstick to what in English we call beating. If it is stated that so-and-so hit and so-and-so without further description, it would be assumed to be a single blow, and it could be any of the magnitude. When the Prophet took a tiny stick and tapped one of the Muslims on the stomach to straighten the ranks in preparation for war, he hit him with this meaning. He hit, that was the word that is used. So it's more proper to say hit, not beat. And the Prophet said, do it without indecent violence, leave no marks. Ibn Abbas said, when the siwak sit in the siwak, it doesn't even hurt. And then he brought up the point about Umar, but he didn't quote it properly. This is it. Do not beat Allah's handmaids. But when Umar came to the apostle of Allah and said, women have become emboldened towards their husbands. He gave permission to beat them, to hit them. Then many women came from around the apostle complaining against their husbands. So the women came and complained about their husbands. So the apostle said, they are not the best among you, the husbands. That's the interpretation. He says when Umar came to the Prophet and then the Prophet let them beat them, and then the Prophet's women, they all came complaining, and the Prophet said, they are not the best among you, these husbands. So he quotes the story and he gives a different interpretation. So what is the position of women in Islam? This is what it says. O Messenger of Allah, who is the person who has the greatest right on me with regard to kindness and attention? He replied, your mother. Then who? He replied, your mother. Then who? He replied, your mother. Then who? He replied, your father. Fear Allah in respect of women, and the best of you are they who behave best to their wives. A Muslim must not hate his wife. Again, Messenger of Allah, I want to join the fighting, and I have come to seek your advice. He said, then remain in your mother's service, because paradise is under her feet. Paradise is under the feet of women. According to Christianity, we're out of heaven because of a woman. She ate from the apple. So, what about that? Now, anyway, here's another point I forgot to bring up. This is what the Prophet himself said. How does any one of you beat his wife as he beats the stag and camel, and then he may embrace her? How can you beat her so hard and then go embrace her? So Islam doesn't teach you to go beat your wives up, etc., etc. But now what about Surah 929? This is what he brought up. Fight those who believe not in Allah, nor the last day, nor hold forbidden which has been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth of the people of book until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. Now obviously if you quote this verse, you can say, yeah, it means Muslims go out and fight and kill everybody. But what did I say? I said concentrate about the historical context. Now I'm going to pretend this is a university assignment for me. I'm going to have to analyze the context of the statement and the historical context in which this verse was revealed. Something he didn't do. Who does he quote? He goes to Ibn Kathir. Why don't we quote the earlier sources, the history which made this verse? Not go to Ibn Kathir, who came much later, and he keeps quoting Ibn Kathir. Ibn Kathir is not a prophet, he's not my God, I don't worship him. So either way, here's the context of Surah 929. Muslim representatives, you know back then, they would send delegates to other kings and kingdoms. Muslim representatives who were sent off to the neighboring empire of the Byzantines, Christians, were murdered. Delegates were murdered. This was the worst crime back then. This is basically the equivalent of a diplomat going to another country today, and when the host country kills him. What's going to happen? The Byzantines, number two, the Byzantines had prepared a massive army to attack the new Muslim empire, because they saw the Muslim empire is growing. Who's this new force? They prepared an army which led to the incident of Tabuk. Converts to Islam Christian tribes under the Byzantine rule were murdered. So the historical context establishes three facts. The Byzantines killed Muslim delegates. The Byzantines were preparing an army to attack the Muslim nation. The Byzantines were killing converts to Islam. So that's why Muslims were given the permission to go fight them. And then he says the compulsion verse has been abrogated by Ibn Kathir. Not all scholars have abrogated it. Some have, some haven't. And then he says, Muhammad said, I'm commanded to fight those who don't declare Allah. Who said fighting just has to be physical fighting? What I'm doing right now is technically fighting. I'm fighting his falsehood against Islam. And then he says, of course I'd like to become a martyr and come back and become a martyr. Again, you see, he's trying to put it in your heads that when you become a martyr, you just go kill everybody. I told you, don't ignore what I said in my opening presentation. When Muslims make jihad, it's because of oppression. So these Muslims who said, yeah, I'd like to come martyr and martyr again, it's because they want to come back, fight oppression, not just come back and kill people. So just because someone wants to come back and be martyred again, doesn't mean they're going to commit terrorism. You see, he's just putting that in their heads and he's not even giving any proof. I want you to think of it. How does saying, I want to come back and be martyred again, mean it's violence? How's that violence? He's just assuming it and he's trying to make it in your hands. That's not violence at all. Then he says, Surah 3:28 says, don't fight if you're weak. That's why the Muslims fought the pagans when they were weaker. That's why the Muslims took on the Byzantine Empire, who were stronger, and the Persian Empire. So that doesn't make any sense. And then he says, don't make peace when you're in power. Yeah, don't make peace when you're in power. But if they come to make peace with you, you make peace. Remember I quoted for you? So yeah, when Muslims are winning a war against people who started the war, we shouldn't go for peace. But if they incline to peace, which they most likely will, then let there be no hostilities. You see, don't ignore what I said in my first statement. It's easy to just ignore everything I said, and then he brings that up. What about Abu Bakr? He said the Prophet used to convert them willingly or unwillingly. Please show me that. I want you to show me one person who converted with the sword in his face. When Abu Bakr said they come ungrudgingly, he was talking about the disbelievers who used to hate Islam. They would argue so much, but eventually they saw the light. He didn't mean it that the Prophet used to force them to become Muslims. That's not what he meant. And another point, he said, Aisha said, believing women have never suffered this much. That's actually just an Arab saying. It's not actually literal. It's just to summarize a bad position. She didn't really mean that they were in the worst position amongst women. And then he brought up Ali, Aisha, etc. This is something natural. When you're a huge nation and you have successors, there is bound to be some conflict happening sometimes. This isn't something bad. This is actually natural, normal. If you study history, this is something normal. And then he made another point. He said, kill people who speak against Islam. This is false. You can go buy the book. He loves this book, Ibn Ishaq's biography. You can go find poetry written against Muslims, writing against Jews, Jews writing against Muslims. There are hundreds of poems written by anti-Muslim, anti-Islamics in these books. Why weren't all of these hundreds of people writing poetry killed? In fact, he had, 30 minutes. He could only bring you 4 cases where people were killed. Does that mean kill people who speak against Islam? In 23 years, he brought you 4 people who were supposedly killed for speaking against Islam. Does that mean we're commanded? Secondly, I didn't bring this up in my last debate, but I'll bring it up now. The story of Abu Affan and Asma bin Marwan, which I refuted already. First of all, Muslims don't even accept this story.
1 minute. 1 minute.
Okay, now it doesn't matter if he says we don't care if you don't accept the story. Because it matters that we don't accept it. So therefore we can't look at this story and say, yeah, we go kill people who criticize Islam. So he can't use this if we don't even accept it. And even if we do accept it, as I said, these people were instigating violence. That's what the accounts themselves say. So either way, that's all the points he brought up. And I'm sorry, none of that proves Islam isn't a religion of peace. And one last point. Remember every point he just brought up, and then remember the debate we're going to have 2 hours from now. That's when we're going to see how consistent you Christians are with your own Bible. Remember each argument he just raised against Islam, because they're going to come back at you, and then I want to see if you apply the same standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Sami. We will now have a 15-minute rebuttal by David Wood.
All right, I began by arguing that the Islamic solution for just about everything is violence. I showed that Muslims are called to fight everyone until they convert to Islam, or in the case of Jews and Christians, until they pay the tax with the proper amount of humiliation, or until they're dead. I showed that Ibn Kathir, the greatest Quranic commentator of all time, said that if people refuse to come to Islam, or refuse to pay the jizya tax, they should be fought till they are killed. And who else did I quote? I quoted Muhammad. I have been commanded to fight against people so long as they do not declare that there is no God but Allah. What in the world does that mean? He's been commanded to fight people until they recite the Shahada. He says the same thing in Sahih al-Bukhari. So, Please give me an alternative explanation of these passages. It doesn't mean Muhammad's going to fight people until they recite the Shahada. What in the world does it mean? Because that's exactly what it says. Muhammad said that he would fight people until they confess that there is no God but Allah. According to the Quran and the commentary by Ibn Kathir, Muslims are to fight Christians. Why? I gave the interpretation. It says it in the next verse, because we say that Jesus is the Son of God. According to Muhammad, the greatest thing in the world is fighting and dying for Allah in a jihad. Somehow Sami doesn't see any of this as violent. Now think about his explanation. He said, look at the historical context. What was the context of the command to fight the people of the book? Well, the Byzantine, wait a minute, next verse includes Jews. Were the Jews attacking them? This doesn't say, go fight the Byzantines. This says, fight the people of the book. It says, fight people who do not agree with your beliefs. And it says in the next passage exactly why they're to do this, because Christians say that Jesus is the Son of God. Nothing about oppression in that verse. Show me where it says, those who oppress you. Show me where it says, those who are amassing an army against you. And by the way, it was actually the Muslims who went up to fight, and they stood there, and they never had a battle. And Muhammad came home. So it was the Muslims who went out to fight, not the Byzantines. Now, Sami says there's no compulsion. I gave you the passage in Ibn Kathir, where Ibn Kathir says that this has been abrogated. And he says, well, who's Ibn Kathir? Well, he's the greatest Quranic commentator of all time. That's who. And again, he knew the sources inside and out. But there are alternative interpretations. I'll give them to you. Al-Qurtubi gives a list of interpretations. One, it is said that it is abrogated because the Prophet forced the Arabs to adopt the din of Islam and fought them and was only pleased with Islam for them. So that's one interpretation. It's obviously abrogated because Muhammad made the Arabs convert. The next interpretation, it is not abrogated and was sent down about the people of the book, and means that they are not forced to adopt Islam when they pay the jizya. Those who are forced are the idolaters. Only Islam is accepted from them, and they are the ones about whom, O Prophet, do jihad against the unbelievers, and the hypocrite was revealed. So he gives some other interpretations, but none of them say, hey, this verse just continues, and you're not supposed to fight any of these people. It's not what it says. It's either this has been abrogated, or it only applies to Christians and Jews if they pay the jizya. Then you're not to force them. So his greatest commentators and the Quran seem to indicate that Muslims are called to fight. And again, nothing about oppression in that verse. He commented on the passage where Abu Bakr says that Muhammad brought people willingly or grudgingly. Now, look at this. He's challenging his own rightly guided caliph. Abu Bakr, what does he know? That never happened. This is Abu Bakr saying this. Now, he says, where did Muslims force people to convert? Well, if you go out fighting people and you give them three options, if you're a Christian, you can pay the jizya. Everyone else, I'm going to fight you until you become Muslim. Well, if you don't want to die and you don't want to be completely humiliated, you accept Islam. Now, do you have to? No, you could die. That's the alternative. But what do the sources say? The Muslims fight until they accept Islam. That's what the sources say, that's what the hadith say, that's what the seerah literature says, that's what we find in the Quran. How can you challenge this? He says that Muslim delegates were murdered. Well, why were they murdered? I'll tell you. The delegates went to the Byzantine Empire and said, if you all become Muslims, your lives will be safe from us. This is the Byzantine Empire. And they said, what? You threatening us? And then killed the delegate. So don't leave details like that out. The Muslims were threatening the Byzantines. He said that I said Muslims are commanded not to make peace if they're more powerful. No, I didn't. The Quran said. Don't forget that. That's what the Quran said. Don't go crying after peace when you have the upper hand. So, as far as I can tell, Muhammad commands over and over again that people are to fight. And again, we just look at these passages. Fight until they say, no God but Allah. If that means anything else, please explain it to me. Next, I showed that according to Islam, apostates are to be killed. Sami says, no, this isn't the case. This was just for a couple of specific situations when they were spies. And he said, these passages aren't clear. Well, let me give you one. Allah's messenger said, whoever changed his Islamic religion, then kill him. Whoever, not that particular person, not this particular situation, whoever changed his Islamic religion, then kill him. Nothing about spies in there. I also showed that Islam deals with critics by murdering them. Abu Afaq, Hassan bin Marwan, and many others were killed for criticizing Muhammad. He says, well, all you can come up with is 4? No, but I'm not going to devote 30 minutes to this thing. And he's right, there aren't a massive number of these, but we do have more than the ones I mentioned. He says a lot of Muslims don't accept Ibn Asad. Well, 2 of the ones I quoted were from Sunan Abu Dawud. You certainly accept that if you're a good Muslim. He says these people instigated Muhammad. Yes, it says in the passage they instigated against Muhammad, but they did it through writing a poem. And Sami thinks this is perfectly just. They wrote a poem against Muhammad, instigating people. Well, if you want to say that's right, then okay. The only thing I'm pointing out is that it is violent. That's the question that we're addressing right now. Is this violent? And that is certainly violent. Now, I showed that Muslims are told to deal with disobedient wives by beating them. According to the Muslim sources and commentaries, women can be beaten with sticks, slapped, tied up, and so on. He says, don't treat them with harshness. He says, well, Muslims are told not to treat them with harshness. Well, by not treating them with harshness, is that how you get green skin? Remember, the woman had skin that was beaten green. He says that I should go to Ibn Abbas. All right, let's go to Ibn Abbas on wife beating. Ibn Abbas said, the beating has to be with a light stick or the light, so not a baseball bat, a light stick. It means admonish them. But if they refuse to repent, then tie them up in their homes and beat them until they obey Allah's commands towards you. This is who he says I should go to. Another passage from Ibn Abbas. To leave them alone, this refers to just banishing them to their beds. He says to leave them alone is to tie them up in their homes just as you would tie your horse. And this is the person he just told me to go to if I want to understand wife beating. He says a better word is hit. Okay, translate it however you want. Hit your wives. He says it's a small stick that doesn't even hurt. That's not what the sources say. When it refers to a light beating, the light beating meant that you're not going to break her bones or do any permanent damage. That's what light beating means. And again, you don't get green skin by doing something that doesn't hurt. And even Aisha herself said that Muhammad hurt her. Now, he says that at the end of that passage, Muhammad said, the people who beat their wives are not the best among you. Well, we saw that Umar beat his wife. We saw that Muhammad hit Aisha. So according to this passage, and according to what Sami just said, Muhammad and the second rightly guided caliph, Umar, were not the best Muslims. If you can live with that as a Muslim, okay. I showed that Muslims are told to deal with sinners through violence. Even sinners who repent are beaten, maimed, and stoned to death. If you had a response, I didn't catch it. So we see that the Islamic solution for everything, again, is violence. And again, how can we say that a religion who turns to violence for everything is peaceful? I showed that when Muhammad moved to Medina, he had a chance to live in peace. But instead, he chose to pick a fight with Mecca. He knew that the people of Mecca depended on the caravan trade, so he terrorized the Meccan caravans, and that's all it is. If people's livelihood depends on this trade, and you attack the trade, and they're going to starve to death, that's terrorizing them. I also pointed out that Muhammad survived in Mecca for 10 years. He says, well, that was because of a powerful family. Well, sure, he did have some protectors, but think about it. The people of Mecca, if they were really enraged, could have killed him. And they didn't. That's the only point I'm making. It was 10 years. That is a long time, far longer than any Christian missionary openly criticizing Islam would survive in Mecca today. He said the people tried to kill Muhammad. True, they tried to kill him when they were leaving. I mean, when Muhammad and Abu Bakr were leaving. But once he got to Medina, he was safe. You can tell by reading sources they didn't care about him anymore. He was out of their hair. And he had the protection of 5 tribes there. So Muhammad was safe. And instead of living a life in peace, He chose to go out and attack them and attack them and attack them until there was a full-blown war. He says the pagans stole the homes of the Muslims. Well, the Muslims left and their houses were sitting there, and yes, the pagans took over these houses, but was it all the pagans? No, some of the pagans didn't care at all what the Muslims did. When the Muslims attacked the caravans, they were attacking everyone's property. Everyone who had anything to contribute would contribute to one of these caravans. And Muslims were attacking this. They're attacking everyone for something that a couple of the pagan people of Mecca did. And if he thinks that's okay, then okay. Now finally, I showed that the people who knew Muhammad best, his wife Aisha and his closest followers, settled their disagreements through bloodshed. The best generation of Muslims slaughtered each other on the battlefield. And where did they learn that the proper way of settling disputes is through violence? They learned it from Muhammad. Again, this is not Osama bin Laden coming all these years later. This was Muhammad's favorite wife after Khadija, and it was Ali. The mother of the faithful versus the commander of the faithful marching out and killing each other. They knew of no other way to settle their disagreements. So we have many good reasons, as far as I can tell, to think that Islam calls for violence. We see violence against non-Muslims. That's what the passages say. And you see how desperate Muslims are to reinterpret these passages. What does Muhammad say? What does Muhammad say? Fight them until they recite the Shahada. Not fight them when they oppress you. That's not what it says. It doesn't say anything like that. There are times when that was revealed, but that was in an earlier stage. Islam has stages. One, they weren't allowed to fight at all in Mecca. Then they were allowed to fight defensive war, but they didn't have to. After that, there was a third stage where they did have to fight if they were being oppressed. It was obligatory. And after that, there was a command to fight everyone, and that was obligatory. You had to fight the pagans, you had to fight the Jews and Christians until they either paid the jizya or converted to Islam. Otherwise, you had to fight. This is not me saying this. I have Sahih al-Bukhari right here with me. Volume 9, at the end of it, has a great scholar commenting on these stages of Islam. And he says that there are these 4 stages. And Sami quotes a verse from stage 2 and says, you see, that's what Muslims are commanded to do. No, that's what they were commanded to do for a while until the later passages came. And so this is not me saying this. Who am I quoting? Al-Qurtubi, Ibn Kathir, quoting Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, quoting the Quran, quoting Abu Bakr. And Sami says, Abu Bakr, who's he? Ibn Kathir, who's he? Who are these people? They don't speak for me, they're not God. Well, I'm going on an assumption here that Abu Bakr knew more about Islam than we do. That Ibn Kathir knows more about Islam than we do.
1 minute, Dave.
That Al-Qurtubi knew more about Islam than we do. These people knew the sources. Many of these people, especially that first generation, knew Muhammad. They solved the problems through violence. So we have, again, many good reasons to think that Islam calls for violence. We don't see any reason to think that Islam is a religion of peace, except for the earlier verses, which, according to his best scholars, were abrogated. That's what we have so far.
Thank you very much, David. We will take a few minutes.
Can you hear me? Does it sound good? Okay. First of all, I want to clear some things up. I said, who is Abu Bakr? I never said that once in this debate. Secondly, what I said about Abu Bakr, you remember he said Abu Bakr forced people, or he said the Prophet used to bring people to Islam diligently or ungrudgingly. I said, bring me proof, bring me one incident where that happened, where someone was forced to come to Islam. I said it never happened. And then I said what Abu Bakr meant by that is that there were some people who always used to rebel against the Muslims, but they eventually became Muslims after hard work and preaching. I never said who is Abu Bakr. And then again, he keeps bringing up Ibn Kathir. I'm not trying to discredit Ibn Kathir. All I'm saying is that he keeps bringing him up.
Who am I bringing up? I'm bringing up the Prophet. I'm not going to Islamic commentaries. So, and it doesn't mean that Islamic commentaries are wrong, but I'm using a higher source. Let him show us the Prophet saying all these things. And then he made a false statement. He said the Prophet beat Aisha, hit Aisha. I'll let Aisha answer that herself. Aisha said, Allah's messenger never hit anything with his hand ever, except when fighting in the path of Allah, nor did he ever hit a servant or a woman. That's Aisha right there refuting him from 1400 years ago. So either way, the Prophet never beat his wife. And then again, to the point, the Prophet said, those who beat their wives aren't the best among you. What if that refers to Umar al-Khattab? Is that a bad thing? Umar al-Khattab wasn't perfect. We don't believe he's perfect. Of course he has his faults, but he's still one of the best Muslims. Everyone gets rebuked sometimes. That's not a bad thing. I don't know how that's a bad thing. And then he says Muslims have to bring up desperate arguments. I don't know if this is desperate. Yeah, Muhammad survived 10 years, but he had protection. That's why he wasn't killed. But let's ignore that he had the protection. He just didn't die. That's what I call a desperate argument right there. The man didn't die because they were protecting him. Don't just ignore that. Don't just throw that out the window. And then again, they tried to kill him before they found out he was fleeing. Before they found out he was fleeing, they tried to kill him. Not the other way around as he's trying to make it. What else was there? Women, they got beaten. Some of the women had green skin. Yeah, that's the bad husband, who the Prophet said they're not the best among you. And then he brought up the point again. The Prophet said, I have been commanded to fight until they believe. I already told you. It doesn't always have to mean physical fighting. There are times for physical fighting and for spiritual fighting. And another point. He said, I'm quoting Abu Bakr. Remember, I quoted Abu Bakr in my opening presentation. What did he say? Don't kill women and children. Don't kill the elderly. Don't kill the handicapped. Don't kill the insects even, the bees. Don't destroy the fruits, the trees, the inhabited place. That's what Abu Bakr says, and that refutes everything you say. So, again, and he brought up apostates again. Kill whoever leaves the religion. Yeah, that was in a specific time. Most apostates, every apostate back then was leaving Islam and going fighting against the Muslims. And these apostates were not even Muslims. They were going to Islam to create problems from within. And the Quran even says, you just wait, Allah will deal with them in the hereafter. And then he brings up the point, what else did he bring up? He says, I use surahs which talk about peace in the early stages. Didn't I say in my first opening presentation that he's going to say that? Didn't I say that? And didn't I asked for the proof where that happened? And I gave you the proof it didn't happen. When the Prophet went to Medina, he made a constitution with the Jews, which he hasn't brought up. When he went to Mecca with 10,000 Muslims, he didn't force them. He has to come prove it, not just say it. We haven't seen any proof of this early stage, later stage, etc. stage. Abu Bakr is the latest stage. He's after the Prophet died. And he says, don't go kill women and children. Don't destroy this. That proves what I'm saying. There is no such thing as early, later, late stage. Those are his main points he brought up. He just repeated himself. I don't know what else to refute now. But either way, he has to come show us where the Prophet came and forced people, where he did all of these things. He hasn't done it in the entire debate. And he conceded another point. He said, yeah, sure, only a few people were killed for criticizing, like only 10. So can you say Islam says kill people who criticize, when in 23 years, 13 years of warfare, only 10 were killed? And out of those 10 stories, most of them aren't even authentic and accepted by Muslims. So can you say Islam says kill the criticizers? I don't know, it's up to you. He even admits there's not that many. Where are all the graveyards of 500, 600, 900, 10, 1,000, 2,000 people who criticize the Prophet? They all criticized the Prophet. And then there's another small point he made, which I didn't bring up. He said the Prophet kicked the Jews out. I already refuted that in my last debate, so I'll talk about it again, because I have nothing else to talk about. So either way, the first tribe that were killed out of Medina, kicked out of Medina, not killed, kicked out of Medina, were called the Banu Qaynuqa clan. What happened? A Muslim lady walked into their marketplace, and in June, he put something on her dress. When she stood up, she became naked. Now back then, when you insult a woman like that, you have a death sentence on you immediately. A Muslim saw that, he overreacted, and he killed a Jew. Now that is a crime, because the Muslims and the Jews were in a treaty. The Muslim would have simply been arrested. The Jews should have just caught the Muslim and sent him to the Prophet, and the Prophet would have dealt with him. But what did the Jews do? They got the whole mob, started lynching the guy, so when the guy's family sees their own person, family member being lynched, they call the other Muslims and a fight happened. So basically the Jews took the law into their own hands. Today, if someone runs somebody over and a mob comes and lynches the guy, you think the police is not going to do anything? They'll send those people to jail. Now what about the Banu al-Nadir tribe? The second tribe who were kicked out of Medina. These people conspired together, the leaders of this tribe, they hired an assassin to kill the Prophet. That was a declaration of war. All the leaders got together and they tried to kill the Prophet. They failed, they were kicked out. The third tribe, Banu Qurayza, the one they always bring up, the 800 Jews who were killed, beheaded. These Jews broke a treaty with the Muslims which said, if you break the treaty, you suffer the consequences. And by the way, by which law were the Jews beheaded? By which law were these 800 Jews killed? By Deuteronomy chapter 21. Whenever you besiege a town, keep the women and children alive and slay all the men. A former Jew judged these 800 Jews by their own book. The leader of that tribe even said, by God, you have judged us fairly. So no one was ever kicked out just for being a Jew. He never kicked these tribes out for no reason. There's always a historical context to everything, which he keeps ignoring these historical contexts. And another point, Ibn Abbas. He said, I'm going to Ibn Abbas. But notice, he didn't refute me. Ibn Abbas hit them with a light stick. My friend has it for you in his car. He can show all of you the miswak stick. It's like this big, it doesn't cause any pain. So thank you. Exactly. Go to Ibn Abbas, he refutes you. Because he says when you hit your wife with a light stick, it doesn't cause pain. And I went to the greatest man to interpret the Quran, Prophet Muhammad. He said, don't beat your wives with indecency. Don't leave bruises on them. So I don't need to go to Ibn Kathir. I go to who? Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Not to Ibn Kathir 800 years later. And I'm not trying to discredit Ibn Kathir. I want to deal with the Quran. Secondly, Ibn Kathir and these scholars, they also interpreted text according to their period. They were interpreting text during wartime. So of course they would interpret verses in such a way to suit themselves and to suit the timing of history. But let's go back.
1 minute, Sam.
Let's go back to the Prophet's time. And who did he kill? Did he ever kill innocent people? It was always warfare. He never just went and killed anybody. He never just went and kicked people out. And then another point he brought up, he said, yeah, well, the pagans, they sold their houses because they left. They left. If I leave my home, that doesn't give you a right to sell it. I'm just leaving because of the oppression. It doesn't give you a right to come later and take it all and sell it. So either way, the raiding caravans was justified. He says, the pagans were pushed to fight. Yeah, pushed the Muslim to fight. It was about time the Muslims stood up. So who cares if the pagans couldn't take it anymore? Feel what the Muslims felt for 13 years under oppression. So either way, no point has been refuted, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sami. We will now have a 10-minute rebuttal by David Wood.
All right. Well, this first debate is nearly over, and so far we've seen a lot of violence in Islam and a lot of attempts to try and explain it away. We've seen violence towards non-Muslims, violence towards apostates, violence towards critics, violence towards women, and violence towards sinners. We've seen that Muhammad turn to the path of violence as soon as he had the opportunity, and that fighting in the jihad is the best thing a Muslim can do. We've seen that Muhammad's closest followers after his death began slaughtering each other, because they learned from him that that's how you settle your differences. So, how has Sami responded? Fighting unbelievers. He says, show him where someone was forced to come to Islam. Well, if by forced you mean holding him down, tying him up, and beating him until he says, okay, I accept Islam, that's not what I'm talking about. Muhammad says he's going to fight until they recite the Shahada. Or in the case of Christians and Jews, he's going to fight them until they pay the jizya. Now, what part of that isn't clear? What part? So the reason people would convert is because they didn't want to fight. They know the Muslims are coming to fight them until they convert. How is this not clear? It's what we find in the Quran, in Surah 9. It's what we find in Sahih al-Bukhari. It's what we find in Sahih Muslim. He says, but prove it. Well, if you're not accepting what the Quran says and you reinterpret everything and say, well, this refers to oppressors where it doesn't say anything about oppressors. If you're not going to listen to the Quran and you're not going to listen to al-Bukhari, you're not going to listen to Sahih Muslim, I don't know what you want me to quote to you. And if you're not going to listen to Ibn Kathir, I don't know what scholar to go to, considering he is the best. Said he's not trying to criticize Ibn Kathir. Well, the point I was making is that he is considered by many to be the greatest Quranic commentator of all time. When he explains these verses, he's giving a completely different explanation than Sami. Now, Sami says, but he was interpreting these things in times of war and so on. Well, that goes both ways. Sami, you're interpreting this in a time when Muslims can't fight, and when, according to your sources, you're supposed to be peaceful towards us, at least pretend to be peaceful until you're strong enough. So how are you interpreting all these passages? Well, you're interpreting them in the light of Western values of peace and nonviolence. But the bottom line remains, if you look to Ibn Kathir, if you look to Al-Qurtubi, if you look to exactly what the Quran says, don't put your interpretation into Surah 9, 29, and 30. It says, fight the people of the book. Why? Because they're oppressing you? Not what it says. Fight them because they do not believe in us. And then the next passage, Christians say that Jesus is the Son of God. May Allah destroy them. That's what it says, because we say this. This is not fighting oppressors, this is fighting people who, according to Islam, are speaking against God. Killing apostates. Sami says every single apostate was attacking Islam. Here's a simple request, show me that. When I open it, it says, whoever, not one person, not 5 people, not those people over there, whoever leaves Islam, kill him. That's what it says. What part of that verse isn't clear? What part? And if you say, no, you're not supposed to do this, you're going against Muhammad. Killing critics. He says, well, Muhammad didn't kill many. Well, yeah, the people learn very quickly that you don't criticize Muhammad if people are being killed, even by their husbands, even by family members. People learn rather quickly. That doesn't matter. According to the Quran, Muslims are supposed to follow the example of Muhammad. If he killed one person for criticizing him, that's what Muslims are supposed to do, unless he comes along later and says something completely different. Beating women. He says, I quoted a false passage. Well, the passage I quoted was from Sahih Muslim. If you think Sahih Muslim's wrong, okay, you can throw that out with your other sources. He says, well, maybe Umar wasn't the best of Muslims. Well, why in the world did you make him the rightly guided caliph then? And keep in mind, this wasn't just a one-time thing. We have a couple of instances of Umar hitting women. He says that the beating doesn't cause pain, really. Turn the skin green. Beat someone so bad that her skin was green. Aisha says her skin was greener than her clothes. What did Muhammad say? How dare you? How dare you beat your wife like that? No. He said, well, you were criticizing your husband. Stop that. That's what the Muslim sources say. Have you noticed that every time a passage is very clear, kill apostates, anyone who leaves, fight the people of the book, crystal clear. Somebody says, not what it means. Well, I can go with what the text says and what your greatest scholars say, or I can listen to you, Sami, but, I mean, no offense, but how do you expect me not to pay attention to your sources and to your greatest scholars? I don't know. Violence towards sinners. We've never really talked about that. Just want to be clear that Islam calls for violence against a lot of people. I talked about Islam taking Muhammad taking the path of violence. Sami says, well, Muhammad had protection. True, just pointing out, no matter how much protection I had, if I went to Mecca today, I would be killed for saying the things I'm saying. He said they tried to kill Muhammad. I'm not objecting to that. I'm saying once he got to Medina, he was safe. He had people to protect him. And instead of staying peaceful, he chose the path of war. That's very important if we're trying to decide whether Islam is peaceful. If you're in a situation where you're safe, what do? According to Islam, you attack. Now, the next generation of Muslims going out killing each other. I pointed out how Muslims were killing each other left and right. Read what happened after Muhammad died. It was a bloodbath. For decades, it was a bloodbath. People killing Muhammad's family. It was a bloodbath. Not by later people who misrepresented it. This was by Muhammad's closest companions. Murdering is, could Christians even imagine Peter and Paul declaring war on each other and just slaying each other? This would be foreign to us. Now, concerning Sami's arguments, he says, well, Abu Bakr says, that according to Islam, you don't kill innocents. Killing an innocent is like killing the entire world. Well, who's innocent according to Islam? If you're a pagan, you're associating partners with Allah, and you're not innocent. If you're a Christian, we saw in Surah 9, you're guilty of saying Jesus is the Son of God. May Allah destroy us for saying this. We're not innocent. So who's innocent? Muslims, good Muslims. Everyone else is guilty once you've heard the call. And that's why, when we look to Ibn Kathir, it's everyone must be called to Islam. If they don't accept it, they should be fought till they are killed. He says Muhammad made a truce with the Jews, and this somehow shows that he was peaceful. Well, in the beginning, Muhammad was very peaceful towards the Jews. He was even praying towards Jerusalem. Then they rejected him, and things weren't very pretty from then on. I said very little about the Jews. I barely mentioned it. Sami, I don't think you're going to help your case that Islam is a religion of peace by bringing up the 3 tribes of Jews. I have to point out, the Jewish tribes, true, made a truce with Muhammad because he was brought there as a peacemaker. Muhammad is brought there as a peacemaker. Keep in mind, how does this look to the Jews early on? You have a man who's claiming to be a prophet, praying towards Jerusalem, and he doesn't return violence for violence. People are persecuting him, he's not doing anything in return. And the Jews say, of course we'll protect you, of course come here and we'll protect you. We will die for you. You're being persecuted. And then Muhammad goes on the offensive, he starts robbing caravans, and the Jews realize, wow, Muhammad is bringing us war with Mecca. We don't want war with Mecca. Then Muhammad, one tribe at a time, starts getting rid of them. And don't act like this was just because the Jews did something really bad. We know from Muslim sources, Muhammad said, I will eliminate the Jews and Christians from the Arabian Peninsula, leaving nothing but Muslims. Muhammad wanted to get rid of these people. And so he took the possessions. He ultimately had a great slaughter of the Qurayza Jews. Why were these people trying to get out of this truce? Why were they fighting against Muhammad? Well, he was assassinating them. If you're the 3rd tribe, you've seen him eliminate the first 2 tribes already. You know you're next. And the Muslim sources show us that they were completely right. Muhammad was eliminating the Jews. And he says Muhammad didn't kill all the people of Mecca. Well, he did want the people, he did want the Quraysh to convert. There's no question there. And Quraysh and the Meccans had the blood retaliation. If you'd gone in there and killed a bunch of people, they were going to get you back. No one's saying that Muhammad was dumb. But we do see plenty of violence in Islam. And the only way around it is to reinterpret everything. The Quran, the Hadith, throw out all of your best scholars, ignore everyone and just say, Islam is peaceful, no matter what the evidence says. Take that path if you want.
Thank you, David. We will now have a 5-minute conclusion statement from Sami Zaatari.
You can all hear me good?
Okay. Folks, I want to just tell you something. Just because you come up here and repeat the same argument doesn't make it true. He keeps saying, yeah, there was violence, there was fighting, but I keep telling you what's the conditions for the fighting, which he keeps ignoring. He just keeps ignoring it, and then he repeats it as if what I said meant nothing. So either way, yeah, Muslims are not to fight. Remember, I even said, Islam is not a pacifist religion. It's easy to quote verses of fighting and then say, look at all this violence. But when you actually study it, each is actually defensive warfare. And here's a point that's completely, he distorts history. He says, well, Peter and Paul wouldn't fight with swords. Peter and Paul were not even in a position to fight. So don't use that. That's not even a good example. That's just abusing history. They were under persecution from the Romans. How are they going to fight each other? So don't use that. That's not a good example at all. When Christians did come in power, what happened? When Constantine became in power, then what happened? So don't go to Peter and Paul when they had no position of power. And then he says Muslims killed Muslims. They were wrong. The Prophet said, don't fight each other. So bad Muslims means Islam is wrong? The Prophet is saying the opposite of it. Don't fight each other. Don't kill each other. Don't even abuse each other with your mouths. And then he brings up the fighting. And then he keeps repeating the point about the green bruise on the lady. And I keep saying, the Prophet said they are not the best among you. And he keeps saying, I'm going to the best Islamic commentaries. I'm going to the best Islamic man, Prophet Muhammad. And I'm giving you what he said. Don't beat them harshly. Cause no wounds in them, just the right hit. What does he do? He ignores that and goes to Ibn Kathir. I would take the Prophet Muhammad over Ibn Kathir any day of the week. And I'm not shy to say that. And that's not an insult on Ibn Kathir. That's just a fact. And he says, I'm reinterpreting things. I'm not using the Quran and Bukhari. I'm just throwing them out. Folks, I've used more Quran hadiths than he has today. He's the one reinterpreting. I'm not reinterpreting them. He says, I don't agree with the verses. No, I don't agree with his interpretation of the verses, which he comes and makes up. He hasn't even shown us what I asked for. Where did Muslims force people to convert? He says, well, yeah, they didn't force them. They just made war on them. Where did they do that? Surah 9:29, I gave you the context. The Muslims were the ones who were being attacked, so they went on an offensive war against the Byzantines. Secondly, if you go study Islam, Muslims aren't commanded to make all non-Muslims pay jizya. For instance, we're in a treaty together. I quoted it for you before, a mu'ahid, someone who's in peace with the Muslims, they don't have to pay any jizya. You have normal relations. The people who do have to pay jizya are the people who start a war with you and you go make a war with them, fight back, and you defeat them. Those people pay a jizya, not just anybody. And anyway, the jizya tax is so cheap. If you can't pay it, you don't even have to pay it. Muslims have to pay higher taxes in an Islamic state. We have to pay zakat. We have to pay more than you. And when a Christian or a Jew or whoever pays the jizya, Muslims are commanded to protect you. You don't even have to go fight. We have to do the fighting for you. So either way, that's... And then he says, Muslims or the Prophet is all about killing. Always kill the sinners. Wrong. There's a beautiful story from the hadith in Bukhari. An adulterer came to the Prophet, and the adulterer kept telling the Prophet, I've committed adultery. The Prophet turned his face from him. 4 times the Prophet turned his face away from the man until the Prophet had no choice but to carry out the punishment. So that story does show mercy, that you should always give them a second chance. The Prophet gave him not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 chances. But he kept coming and he wanted the punishment. And then he brought up a point, I'm interpreting things according to Western values. I quoted you verses from 1400 years ago, before your Western values.
30 seconds.
I'm not doing anything according to your Western values. My time's finished?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay, what else? That's probably... Okay, the Jews, he said, I shouldn't have brought them up. I should have brought them up because it refutes him. It shows the Prophet didn't just go kill them. It was warfare. And he says, The Jews wanted the prophet as a peacemaker. They knew he was in war with the pagans when they got him. Don't leave that out and say they didn't know that and he brought war. These same Jews would go to Mecca and instigate against the prophet. Don't leave that out. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Sam. We'll now have a 5-minute conclusionary statement. David Wood.
All right. Is Islam a religion of peace? I'll respond to a few things. Sami says, according to Islam, you can't force anyone. Well, if we look at the sources, it says, fight them until they recite the Shahada. What in the world does that mean? He says you can't kill innocents. I've shown that, according to Islam, we are not innocent. Christians, we say Jesus is the Son of God. And according to Surah 9, you fight us because of that. He says war is only in self-defense. Well, there was a time in Islam when war was only in self-defense, but that wasn't always the case. In the beginning, Muslims weren't allowed to fight at all. Then they were allowed to fight. Then they were called to fight anyone who's oppressing them. And finally, they were called to fight unbelievers. That's what Surah 9 says. He's going to Muhammad's final marching orders, and he's interpreting those in the light of what Muhammad said earlier. It's not how you're supposed to do it in Islam. The later revelation is the one that abrogates the former. He says, what's the condition for fighting? It says it right there in Surah 9. We say Jesus is the Son of God. We have beliefs that are different from the Muslims. We do not accept the religion of truth, i.e. Islam. That's the condition for fighting. He says Peter and Paul weren't in a position of power. Well, you don't have to be in a position of power for a couple of people to get mad at each other and kill each other. But when we look to Islam, regardless of what the situation was, we saw them killing each other. He says, well, they're bad Muslims. Really? Aisha was a bad Muslim? Just called Aisha a bad Muslim. Some of the people there who were leading the armies, one of them was a man who saved Muhammad's life at the Battle of Uhud. According to Sami, he's a bad Muslim because they were out there slaying. Well, guess what? Almost all of the Muslims were fighting. But they were all bad Muslims. Think about the things he's saying in order to rescue his religion from the charges of violence. They're all bad. Aisha, Ali, they're bad. They're bad Muslims. That's him, not me. Concerning the wife beating, he says, well, it says, the men who beat their wives are not the best among you. Think about it. The man was allowed to beat his wife. He was allowed to beat her until her skin was green. What was the punishment? Nothing. Muhammad rebuked the woman. So, big penalty. He's not the best of Muslims. Well, according to Sami, all the Muslims back during his time were really bad. He says, if there's a treaty, no fighting. So you don't have to pay the jizya tax. If there's a treaty, no fighting. What do the Muslim sources say about the treaties? You cannot do a treaty more than 10 years, and it's only while you regroup and have a chance to build up your forces. Muslims aren't allowed to make permanent treaties because they know that as soon as they're strong enough, they're going to fight. And so they say, no more than 10 years. He says that there's a story that shows mercy. He brings up a story about Muhammad stoning a man to death to show how merciful he was against sinners because he kept turning away. You have to be pretty desperate to bring up a story about murdering someone, well, executing him, to show that your religion is merciful. And by the way, what does the Quran say about people caught in sexual sin? Show them no mercy. That's the Quran. So according to Sami, Muhammad violated his own religious text. That's fine with me. He said that the Jews knew that Muhammad was at war. Well, no, they knew that Muhammad was a persecuted prophet. That's when they started thinking about protecting them. So we see no reason to think that Islam is a peaceful religion. When we examine the verses of the Quran in there, we see just because Muhammad's not called to violence early on doesn't mean he's not called to violence later. We saw Muhammad himself said he's commanded to fight people until they say the creed. We've seen violence towards non-Muslims, violence towards apostates, violence towards critics, violence towards women, and violence towards sinners. We've seen that Muhammad had a perfect opportunity to live a peaceful life, but that he chose an everlasting war instead. So why do Muslims claim that their religion is a religion of peace? Well, some Muslims are doing what the Quran tells them, smiling in our faces, cursing us in their hearts. But I think that many Muslims really believe this, that their religion is peaceful. And so they throw out passages in Al-Bukhari, they throw out passages in Sahih Muslim, they reinterpret all the clear passages in the Quran. They say, All right, throw out our scholars. Where are they getting the idea that Islam is peaceful? They're not getting it from Islam. Praise God that the teachings of the Lord Jesus Christ are still having an impact on the world, even today, and that even Muslims are being influenced to be more peaceful. God bless you.